I'm going to go ahead and get this started. We are recording. This will be sent out to the 300 people on the National Poetry Month Summit. So thank y'all so much for being here. I started the summit because I got really frustrated with how scattered the information for National Poetry Month was. Poets who were trying to get published, they would have to do hours of research to find publication companies. And the websites that had lists of publication companies were all disorganized as well. And people were missing out. They were joining 30 for 30 groups where you do a poem a day, each day for April, that weren't really supporting them. And Jay Ward actually started one called Starfish that is incredibly supportive. And so we just all kind of came together to do something for National Poetry Month that would be more accessible, more organized, and would provide poets with the tools and skill sets they needed to level up and to grow in April. Because when you have an event that's now worldwide for National Poetry Month, I mean, if they're not taking advantage of it or getting anything out of it, then it's really a disadvantage rather than it is an advantage. And when so many people are talking about poetry during April, and to see so many poets not level up, it's really frustrating and disheartening for a lot of us who are in the place of service. So this is why we provided it. And it has grown. This is the last year that it's free. So if y'all want to be back on the panel next year, you will get paid for it. So very transparent right now. None of us are getting paid for this, including myself. I'm just doing it because I really care about the craft and I believe in the power that poetry has. And I just really want to help other poets live healthier lives, because self-care and poetry don't always go together. And we're trying to bridge that gap. Yeah,
that's wonderful.
It's so true. Yeah. And you would think poets, there's this stereotype that we're very sensitive. So you would think that we would be taking better care of ourselves than, most average people would, but that is so not the case. So, yeah, so I'm really excited to be here. I'll let y'all introduce yourself. I'm not going to read the bios because we've already posted them and sent them out. A lot of times with these panels, the first 30 minutes is always like the long bios, and it's like, okay, let's get to the good stuff. So, but I'll let y'all introduce yourselves. I'll start. My name is Shane Manor. I'm a spoken word artist and a painter that's located in North Carolina. I run a nonprofit called Guerrilla Poets, and we do poetry, art, and music workshops in places that have little to no access to the arts. And I'm also a spoken word teacher for several organizations, and I also poetry mentor adults as well. So we'll start with you, Orna, and then we'll go to Marquis and Jay Ward, if you'll introduce yourselves.
Okay, hi, and thank you so much for having me along. I'm really delighted to be here and looking forward to hearing everybody's questions and also from the other members of the panel. My name is Orna Ross. I'm zooming in here from London, but as you can possibly tell, I'm not sure if you can, I'm originally from Ireland, and being Irish is very much part of my poetic identity. I am a poet and a novelist, but I also run the Alliance of Independent Authors, so I am a passionate advocate for the power of self-publishing books, and that's probably what I'll be kind of focusing on today is, with the indie poet publishing indie books and how to do that well.
Wonderful. We are so thrilled to have you. And that's something that a lot of poets, especially when we've got so many poets that are self-publishing right now, they really need those tools and that insight. So thank you so much for being here. And it's so awesome to hear the accent and to have someone that's across the pond. All right, Marquis, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Okay, cool. I am Marquis Love. I am a poet. I am a singer, musician, rapper, all of those things. I'm also a fellow guerrilla poet, and I am the creator and organizer of Be a Grave Robber, which is it's an artist community that I'm just starting up, that pretty much is based on artists helping artists. So it's the funds that go to the artists are funds that are from artists. Workshops that are held are for artists from artists. And we're just now starting up. We're about to be a year old in July. So it's nice to meet everyone.
Awesome, Marquis. And if people are interested, let me put this in the chat. Yeah, please, he's got a Facebook group, and he's doing a lot of really cool things right now. So I will put that in the chat as well. Jay Ward, would you like to introduce yourself, hon?
Sure. First of all, I'm really, really happy to be here. I'm excited to be with Orna and Marquis, and of course with Shane. Shout out to Marcial. I'm not sure if you shouted out Marcial in Albuquerque. How you doing? Shout out to Pam. So I am a spoken word artist and a page poet, whatever those two designations mean. I won the National Poetry Slam with my team in 2018 and the individual World Poetry Slam last year in 2019. I'm a program director for a youth organization that provides a platform and workshops and opportunity for youth to share their voice through poetry. I have a upcoming microchap book coming out with Bull City Press in the next month or so. And I guess that's it.
Awesome. Yeah, I have had the great privilege of doing several workshops with Jay, and he is an incredible facilitator. So thank you, Jay, for being here. He's been on the panel the past 2 years, or
2, yeah.
Yeah, past 2 years. And I'm so happy that you've joined us. And Marquis was with us last year as well.
Hey, I'm Pam Turner. I work for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library and promote writing events and poetry events, and just try to bring more creativity into the library environment.
Thank you so much, Pam. We're so excited that you're here. Marcel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Marcel Delgado from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm a poet, recently published. I put on a monthly reading called Voices of the Audio here in Albuquerque. And I just work, and that's it. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia. And did I hear in there was a open mic that I was in? Did I hear that you got nominated for Poet Laureate of New Mexico?
Yeah, of Albuquerque, the city of Albuquerque. Yeah, that was pretty exciting. It's nice to be recognized once in a while.
That's awesome. So congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
Marissa, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Hey Shane, good to see you again. Hey Mars, nice to see you too. I'm a poet. I'm here in Albuquerque also, and this is my first time doing anything like this. I just met Shane last week. She's a freaking phenomenal woman. Very blessed that her path crossed into mine. We're actually getting ready to launch a publishing house here in New Mexico. My kids are running around in the back. Because there isn't enough opportunity, I think, in the Southwest for authors in general, not just poets, especially for kids stuff too. And so we're trying to also launch poetry for the youth. So it's very exciting, lots of stuff happening here in New Mexico. And thank you all for your time today.
That's exciting, Marcia. I can't wait to hear more about that. I'm so excited that y'all are starting a publishing house. That's amazing. So I'm going to get into these questions. We have a lot of questions. When I sent out the call that was like, hey, use us while you got us, they responded. So we've got I think six or seven questions. A lot of poets were eager to utilize our wisdom and our experience. So I just want to jump right into this. And it's so important to show the work and show how we got to the places that we are. A lot of people I run into think that it's not doable, or they think that, well, you had an upper hand, or you had this that I don't have, you know? And I think that when we talk about topics like this and that we share our wisdom and our insight, it really inspires other people to know that they can do it too. And it kind of helps them get over the hump and the fear that they might have. So the first question that we have is how to organize your poems for a book. So I'm going to let the book expert, Orna Ross, take that one, and then we can all chime in after her.
Okay, so like for anyone, it comes down to what you want the book to achieve for the reader. So a lot of us, the poems arrive and we don't know where they come from, or else we decide we want to write on a particular theme and we go off and we write a poem about that. And then we have lots and lots of poems about lots and lots of different things. And in a book, the reader expects something. They don't expect it to cohere, obviously, like a novel or a non-fiction book, but there does usually a book that has some sort of organizing principle. Readers prefer that. Now, having said that, it is possible to just now, because you can self-publish, and you can self-publish quite cheaply if you keep it to digital publishing of ebooks, you can actually just put out your poems as they arrive. So one of the things that I do, the simplest kind of publication that I do, is every 10 poems I just put together into a chapbook and put it out there. And they're just they're almost like calling cards, they're not really what you would call a book, but a micro book, if you like. And it's a very satisfying thing to do, because you see your progress, you see how many poems are actually publishable. So we don't publish every poem. I think that's the first and most important thing to say. Not every poem that you write is meant to be put out there. And then I think when we're thinking about a book, we're probably thinking about something more extensive, a collection, a selected, or a theme organized. So a selected collection of poetry is often time-based. So poems between, that you wrote over a 5-year period are put together. Or a theme is to pick, poems about mothers for Mother's Day. These kinds of poetry books sell very well, actually, if you can find a theme that is connected to an occasion and bring it in around that. And then, obviously, once you've got to a certain point in your career, you can do a sort of an entire collected. Every poem that you wanted to put out there can be put out there. And in that, when you've reached that stage, it's more you as the poet who is the interesting attraction of the book, rather than the theme or organizing principle of the book. So, I mean, there's so much that can be said about book publishing, but in terms of organizing it from, thinking about the reader and what they want, I think that's the most important thing.
That is great advice, and you're exactly right. For a lot of poets starting out who don't have a lot of chapbooks or books under their belt, publishers always suggest that you have a theme, that you have a theme that ties all the poems together. And if you can find that thread of commonality that goes between the poems, then you can put them in order into a book. And the perfect example that I love to give is like a band, right, would not come out with their best of album as their first album, right? It just doesn't make any sense. But so when you're thinking about organizing your poems for a book, definitely having a theme when you start out, not only does it help the reader understand what they're getting into, not only do publishers prefer that, but also you'll make more money, because then you have a way to promote it and it's not so scattered. I love what you said about every 10 poems you'll release like an ebook or something small, like a micro chapbook. I love that, because as a prolific poet that I have, I'm sitting on so much work. It's really refreshing to hear like, hey, you can do this. Like, you don't have to like labor and drive yourself into the ground trying to get these like 100 poems in this one book or whatsoever. You could release them in small, easily digestible and easily accessible ways. So that's very refreshing to hear. Thank you for that. I think a lot of us who write constantly, who write on a daily basis for our practice, there's this pressure that, oh, I got to get it out there, or they're not sure if they should put that poem in a book. So it's also nice to hear that not every poem needs to be put out there. So thank you for that. let's go to Marquis. Your thoughts on organizing poems for a book.
Had to unmute my mic. I haven't put out a book yet. However, if it sounds similar to putting out the process sounds similar to putting out an actual, or to compile songs for an album. And I guess my thoughts would be just like you were saying, Orna, like make sure that there's a common theme between each poem. It's almost like jumping out of that theme or jumping off of the story that you're trying to tell. Is like you're watching a good movie and the first part of the movie is amazing, then it jumps to some random scene that for the rest of the movie you're trying to figure out where that scene belongs. It's like forcing a piece of poetry to be in a book, or forcing a song to be in a project that doesn't belong. So it's like sticking to your story, sticking to the flow, making sure that the book or the project is consistent. And I think I think that's a great way to go about it. If each poem coincides with the next, that's pretty good flow.
I love what you said about it flowing too. And it's like a ride, you know, it's like you have to be able to lead them from point A to point B. And I will say this, Marquis, thank you for that, because you gave me a great example too in my book that I'm about to release. And Orna, you touched on this too. Like, what is the feeling? What is the thing that you want your reader to leave with? What do you want them to experience? And that'll help you figure out the order of the poems, because I struggle with that with Divine Disturbances. I think Marquis, Pam, and Jay, I think I probably reached out to y'all three about like, help me with the order of this, because I have the poems, but I'm struggling to figure out which poem goes where. And what happened to get me over that was focusing on, okay, what is the emotion I want the reader to feel when they read that last poem, and what's going to take them there. So I literally I rented an Airbnb in the mountains, cheap, great writing retreat for myself. And I sat down and I had printed out all the poems and I laid them all out on the floor. And even in my creative coaching business, this is how I teach other people to deal with their content organizing, right? Print it out, get the hard copies, lay it out all over the floor. If it takes up the whole space of the floor, do that. It's okay. So that way you can visually see each poem, and then start playing, start arranging the order and see, well, what works? Where did it fall off? Where did the flow fall off, right? And that's what helped me organize the poems in that book. So thank you for that, y'all. Jay Ward, your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I agree with everything everybody said so far. So the only thing I'll add is some general tips I've gotten from people along the way. And one is, once you have the poems that you think belong in this collection, one thing that people find helpful is to print all those poems out and lay them out like on the floor or on the ceiling, not the ceiling, but like on the wall or something. Lay them out and start putting them in order and start playing with that order. And that way you can not only see how the themes tie together, but you can also see visually if you've got too many prose blocks lined up against each other, which is really heavy for the reader. Making sure that you have some variation also in the way that it looks, as well as sticking to the theme and the commonality. And then the second thing is, I don't know that this is a general rule. I do think that it's helpful if the work is strongly thematic, that the first poem in the collection many times informs the reader on how to read this body of work, like what they're expecting, what they're looking for. That first poem many times kind of leads the way in their expectations. So having that in mind, I think, might be helpful.
Could I add two things, Shane?
Sure.
I'm not sure if can you hear me? Yeah. There are two things that I think might be useful. One is relates directly to what you were just saying there, which is what the reader meets first when they meet a poem. And it's not traditional in traditional publishing to do an introduction, generally speaking, to poetry. So if you have a poem that sums up the theme, then that is a brilliant idea. Make it come first, and it launches the feeling, as you were saying, that you want the reader to have. But if that's not possible, and sometimes it's not. A small introduction, just a page or so, we have found that readers really love that, a kind of a setting of the scene, and almost telling them how to read it or how you'd like them to read it. Of course, then they read the poem themselves. It takes a great reader to make a great poem. You know, their imagination must come in and they create the poem in their own way. But it's no harm, especially at the beginning of the book, for you to just say something about the making of the poetry and how you would like them to read it. And the second thing I'd like to say, just in terms of organizing the book, there are two very good pieces of software which you can use to order a lot of poets work in Microsoft Word. It's actually quite a difficult word processor to work with when it comes to laying out a book. And so two really good pieces of software that you may or may not know about. One is called Scrivener, Scrivener, and the other is Vellum. Now, Vellum only works with Apple. It doesn't work on Microsoft, but they are both really fantastic in terms of laying out and being able to juggle and move the poems around and see where you want things to go, and breaking them up into maybe, you know, if you want to break the book up into parts and things like that. So yeah, just in case they might be useful to people.
What was that second one again?
It's called Vellum, Vellum. It's a really beautiful software because it actually you can produce a PDF that you need for a print book and ebooks in the form that Amazon, Apple Books, Kobo, you know, that all these different distributors and retailers want the book. So just at the press of one button, you can actually get all formats and large print as well. So it's really is a magical piece of software. I do all my own formatting now. I used to outsource that and get a professional formatter, but with Vellum, you don't need to. And they have a lovely verse font and a whole structure that really works well and makes the job so easy. So you can actually get stuck into the making of the pages as well, which is really good fun.
Thank you for that. I didn't know about those two software platforms, so I'm excited to check those out. Thank you for that. As someone who loves typing instead of handwriting anymore, I used to handwrite everything, but now when I'm typing poems, it just is able for me to edit as I go, and I'm really excited to check out those platforms. So thank you for that. Great stuff, y'all. I want to welcome Mr. Smith or Miss Smith? Mr. Smith. I bet that's Mr. Smith. So welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Oh, it is a miss.
Here. No, it's so fine. It's so fine. I answered anything.
Oh. Welcome. I'm going to put you back on mute. We just got through with the first question, and it was how to organize your poems for a book. And we are recording this, so the full video will be available. So welcome. So the second question we have is when to use poetic form and when not to. I'm going to let Jay Ward kick us off with this one because he has been doing form for the month of April, and he's actually been combining forms. So he has form on the brain right now. So
I do have form on the brain, too much so. I wake up, this is a true story, I wake up sometimes thinking of reordering a poem with a particular form, and I wake up, you know how you wake up and like, this is genius. It doesn't necessarily work out, but so form on the, when to use form and when not to. I don't know that there's a clear-cut answer to this, but here's what I've been doing with form, and here, I guess, is my answer to that question. What I've been doing with form is learning about each particular form, the history of it, reading it, trying to break it down, writing it, and then writing new and revisiting old poems, and taking poems that were free verse and rewriting them into form, and vice versa. Writing a poem in a form and then breaking it and taking it back into free verse and seeing what happens with the poem and what I learned from the poem. And I am of the idea that a poem wants to exist a certain way. And just because you write it a first draft a certain way does not mean that's the way the poem wants to exist. It might be, but not necessarily. And so I've kind of learned for myself what I like about particular forms and what they can do for me. And I'm really into hybrids right now. I'm really into hybriding two forms together for what their strong suits are, and taking certain things out. So when should you write a poem in form or not? I think, I don't know how to answer that other than to play with it, and see. I mean, what you get from form and staying into these rigid constraints, or what feels like rigid constraints, oftentimes is beautiful work that you wouldn't have written that way without those constraints. But because of the constraints, there are sometimes things that you or the poem want to say that don't get said because of the constraints, which is why free verse is also popular. But free verse also gets a bad rap for the same reason, because there aren't any constraints. Then your editing might not be as good, or the poem might not be as tight. I believe the poem wants to exist a certain way, and I believe the influence of form can help any poem. But knowing whether it should be form or not, I think is going to be pretty objective, depending on, or subjective rather, depending on what you want to accomplish with that poem, how you want it to be read, what impact you want it to have, and how closely tied you are to things like rhythm and rhyme and syllable count and pentameter and things like that. I don't know if that answers the question. I'll come back depending, maybe some other people's answers will spark something and I'll come back to it, but that's my answer for right now, I think.
No, I think you've answered it very well, and it is a choice. It is the poet's choice, and it is the poem's choice. I love that you put the responsibility on the poem. I love that, because I believe that. I believe that there's a certain way that the poem wants to exist, and I think that when you have a disconnect between your work and yourself, that's when the things get muddled, right? So I've been talking a lot lately about intimacy with our writing, because I got hit hard with that. As a stage poet, not having an audience right now to bounce off my energy ball, right? When I'm on stage, I was left alone with just me and my work. And I realized how disconnected I had been from my work. I was very connected to the audience, but to my own work, I got confused within my own work. So when you're lacking that intimacy and that personal relationship that you have in private with your work, you can get confused on, well, what's the right thing for this poem? Because there's not a conversation happening between the poet and the poem. There's not a relationship, a deep, intimate relationship happening there. And that's something that I recently have discovered. I will say this, though. I look at form for leverage, right? So if I have a poem, let's say it's about loss, right? Or grief, or anything like that. An erasure form might be perfect, because it's the same type of concept, right? Something is being taken away. If it's a poem about something being stolen, I'm losing something, right? An erasure form, which, you take the words out, you take certain words out and it creates another poem below it, might be perfect for that poem because it drives the meaning home, right? So sometimes I'll look at themes to see if, okay, well, this form might be perfect for this poem because of the way the form is constructed, right? That's really my only advice on that, is to look at, well, would this form fit the point, the message of the poem, right? I don't use form a lot. I want to. There are some poems that I have that are in form, but I'm more of a free form poet. And I have ran into the editing issue that you've talked about, Jay. Like, when you don't have a form, it could be very confusing to know what to edit. And again, I think it goes back to our practice. It goes back to how intimate we are with form, with our writing. Are we growing our toolkit? Are we growing our skill sets? Great feedback. Orna, we'll go to you.
Yeah, I do poetry in form and free form, and two forms that I tend to, at the moment, I seem to be working with the sonnet quite a bit, which I hadn't touched since I was in school, which is like a very long time ago. But a few months ago, for some reason, I was meditating and a sonnet came almost fully formed about meditation, which was like just an incredible experience. I very occasionally, you guys know, very occasionally you just get a gift of a poem that just arrives. So it was one of those situations. It doesn't happen to me very often. So that set me off on this sonnet jag, and so I've been writing sonnets of late. But form I use all the time, I mean practically all day, every day, but really a lot, is haiku. I just love turning whatever is happening into haiku in my head, or just scribbling it down and just playing with it. And because it's such a simple and pure form, and it seems so easy, and it's so not easy, it's always kind of working that poetic muscle. So I guess they're my two favorite forms.
I love that you said that whatever is happening, you'll try to turn it into a haiku. I got really on fire yesterday for this. I had signed up for a summit myself, and it was on somatic movement. And there was a guy who was saying, if your work does not leave the studio, the dojo, the mat, whatever it may be, then it's worthless. So whatever your practice is, if you're not invoking it into your life on your day-to-day, then you're not embodying that thing. And I think that playing with what is the haiku in this moment? I do it all the time with poetry. I'm like, where's the poem in the room? And like, that's a beautiful way to invoke that into your day-to-day life practice. And so thank you for that, Orna. Let's go to Marquis. I will say this before I go to Marquis. There are a lot of rappers. There are a lot of stage poets that use form. And like, I was at a workshop where I think it was Dasan broke it down to the science behind certain rap lyrics, and it blew me away. I was like, I don't know if I have the math like capability to write this way. Like the internal rhymes, all of that, it was incredible. So I just wanted to mention that because I'm hoping, Marquis, that you can touch on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, I was just about to, as a matter of fact. I'm learning so much, man, like listening to y'all's perspective. It's helping me to learn quite a bit about poetry. When I started writing poems, I did it just like I'm writing a rap verse, except it was, me writing without a beat. I think the thing about writing a rap verse is you're focused mainly on rhythm. Of course, like wordplay, those things it almost feels like it comes naturally, but you're more so focused on the delivery, the execution of the rhyme, like how it's said, the way it's said. And it reminds me so much of free verse poetry, because there aren't really any constraints. It's like even your bar count doesn't have to be exactly you don't have to put a rhyme at the end of every bar. It's like you can go wherever you want to go with it. That's a rap verse for you. You can experiment as much as you want to. So as far as poetic form, all I've ever written is free verse. And on top of that, I've experimented with haiku here and there. I've just now started really getting into doing erasure poems, blackout poems. But I kind of find myself going back to those same familiar tendencies with rap music, like creating the same type of scape as a rap verse in my free verse poetry. So I hope that answers the question. I'm still trying to learn as far as like what poetic form is necessary when, because everything sounds like music to me.
I'm exactly the same way, and I always go back to freeform because of the rhythm. My poetry has a lot of rhyme and slant rhyme, but there's also internal rhyme, so it's not Dr. Seuss rhyme,
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of play that you can do with it, with surprising pauses and building intensity and things like that. And I think it always, like the clever wordplay that you're talking about, I think that it comes out naturally because you are in that state of flow and rhythm. And
Mm-hmm.
I know that it exists in form. It's just harder for me to get there because I didn't start out learning that way, right? So I'm excited to experiment with form and find that natural flow once it becomes second nature. I think it's like with anything. If a guitarist picks up a guitar and they're just learning how to play, they might fumble with the chords a little bit. But once they know the chords and they know where their fingers are supposed to go, they shred it, right? So Yeah, thank you for that insight, Marquis. That's wonderful.
Can I tag something, Shane?
Yeah.
This is partly because of that discussion that Dasan had on, breaking down those lyrics, but he was breaking down Lil Wayne lyrics and kind of comparing them to the influence of Poetic Form. And I know of a song by Lil Wayne called Dedication and a song by Mos Def called Two Words that is heavily influenced by Kennings. And also listening, I strongly believe that there are songs that Drake has that are basically Pantoons, just modified. So like the influence of form, I think is appreciated across genres, but also the influence of free form is likewise influenced across genres. And you said something about slam poetry. There, Sean Patrick Mulroy has a villanelle that he used in a slam, and it's amazing, and it's online if anybody looks it up. I can't remember the name of it though, but Sean Patrick Mulroy.
Yeah, that's perfect example of how like form can be found across genres. And I have seen spoken word poets use form as poems. We had a member, Alito, who did sonnets, and you would never know they were a sonnet. And it was incredible. And at the end of the poem, he'd be like, did y'all know that was a sonnet? And people would be like, a sonnet? I thought I was expecting ye old English and stuff, but it sounded like hip hop. And it was, so you are the master of the poem. You are the crafter. Take what you want, what you need, and leave the rest, Thanks, y'all. So our third question, how to get reviews for your book or your spoken word album. So I will start with this because I've had great success. I help other poets get reviews. So one thing that you want to do when you're asking people for reviews is you need to keep in mind your target audience. So let's say, for example, or I'll just use my own example, okay? So Divine Disturbances is getting ready to be released. And the poems in the book are about having adrenaline disorder and your body being caught in fight or flight and seeing disturbances everywhere because you are embodying a disturbance, right? So I know that the people that this book is going to help are people that have had previous trauma, maybe people who also have adrenaline disorder, people who had sleep deprivation, anything where their body is in a state of disrupt, right? So what I did was I got a psychologist review for the book. So that way when I promote this to people and I take the book to places where, like centers that help with trauma, I can have an actual psychologist's review on the back of the book. And then I also know that because I'm kind of a bridge between spoken word and page, like I have both those communities in my network, I got a page poet, the Poet Laureate of North Carolina, and I'll tell you how I got her review because it wasn't like me and her were in a close relationship or anything. It was very much a cold call. And then the second thing I got was Jay Ward's review. He was very well respected in the spoken word community and very, very looked up to. So those are three people that I know my audience, when they look at that review and they see that name, they're going to go, oh, wow, this book must be good because these people endorsed it. So you want to be thinking of that. You want to be thinking, who are the leaders in the community in which you're serving? So I'm going to tell you how I got the Poet Laureate of North Carolina to review my book, even though it was self-published, even though the woman is so busy, and even though we're in the middle of a pandemic. So I sent her an email, and when you're cold calling, there are three things that you have to add into your email. The first one is you have to be aware of what their projects are or what they're working on right now. So go to their Facebook page, go to their Instagram, look, be like, okay, what was the award that they just got? What is something that they're doing that I can mention in my email to show them I respect their work, I'm paying attention to them, right? And I'm making sure that that person is being seen and heard and celebrated. So you want to start off your email with, hey, congratulations on your latest success of blah, blah, blah. Or, hey, I'm really excited about this project you just posted, blah, blah, blah. I've been a fan of yours for a long time. Or I look up to you. I respect your opinion a lot. And then the second thing you want to do is the ask. I know you're busy right now, but I just have this book. I would love to get your review or your opinion on it, because I respect your opinion, right? And the third thing, and this is key, you have to give them a guilt opt-out. So that guilt opt-out can be, I know that you're incredibly busy, so if you don't have time, it is perfectly okay. I'm still a fan. And you would think it's counterintuitive because it's like you're giving them permission to say no, but 90% of the time you will get a yes if you put that in your email. And I do it as well. If someone emails me and they give me a guilt-free opt-out, I will usually say yes, because it shows they're respectful of my time. I don't have to worry about, you know, they don't sound thirsty. They don't sound desperate. You know, they're being very respectful. So those are the three things. Acknowledge what they're currently doing, do the ask, and then give them the guilt-free opt-out. And it has worked every single time. So I got this is the second book I've had a poet laureate endorse. And it works so well, y'all, that they will even offer to promote your book. If they will. The Jackie Sheldon, who is the poet laureate of North Carolina right now, is incredibly busy. She was a week late on getting me my review, but I didn't hound her. I just trusted and sat in the knowing that she had already said yes. She's a professional. She's not going to forget. Someone who is a poet laureate knows how to do what she said she's going to do. So I didn't email her again. I just waited. And when she emailed me back, she was so thankful for that, because so many people who are further along on their poetic career get so frustrated when people hound them or put pressure on them because they're already doing so much. So when she emailed me back with a review, she was like, if there's anything I can do to help promote your book, let me know. So don't be afraid to ask. Just make sure you have that structure of you're being respectful and those three things. I will turn it over to Orna, and then we'll go Marquis, and then we'll go Jay.
So in our world, there are different kinds of reviews. So that I think what you just said there is so useful and so on point. I'm going to spread that to everybody I know, and I endorse every word as somebody who is quite busy myself and who gets a lot of requests. I've never actually, though, looked at the structure of what actually makes me move, and I reckon that's in there. So yeah, in our world, that's kind of what we call the blurb or the editorial review that you can use on your Amazon page up above. So I'm going to just to take a different look at this, just to talk a little bit about customer reviews, and which are also very important in terms of social proof when your book is up and out there and people want it. So I think it's well worthwhile to try and get people to review your book on whatever retailer your book is available for sale. And those reviews don't tend to happen by accident, and eventually they do, but not when the book is coming out, which is when you want there to be some reviews there. So a lot of authors and poets now are putting a lot of work into building up their own email list of people who like their work. So it's an important thing to include on your website. And I suppose I should also say, you should have a website. Please have a website. Don't just have a Facebook page. Own your own little piece of real estate on the internet. And on your website, as an indie poet who's going to sell your own work, you should have a transactional website where somebody can buy your work as an ebook, or maybe an audiobook as well, a print on demand book possibly, on your site, because there are all sorts of benefits to that. But just focusing on the reader review part, when somebody purchases a book of yours, you have their email and they become part of your list. And getting people to join your email list is really key to success as an independent book publisher. So you need on your site to have some sort of magnet that attracts people to you and your work. And usually what people offer is a free book, because if somebody's interested in that free book, then and they like it, then they are people who will buy your work going forward. And over time, and this is not something that happens overnight, but over time you gather in around you a community of readers who enjoy what you do, and some of the readers within that community will be super fans. They will just love what you do. They can't get enough of it. They can't wait for the next thing. And you can invite them to become part of your review team. So that before, and this is all perfectly legitimate on all, sometimes poets and authors worry that this breaks some of the rules, the strict rules that are rightly in place on the retailers, but this is all completely accepted and part of what every successful self-publisher does. When it's coming up to the time to release the book, then you give it in advance to your advanced review team, and they are ready then to review the book when it actually is released. And that means that your book has some customer reviews when it's going out there into the world, which means it's much more likely to be bought by people who don't know you and don't know your work.
You made so many great points there, Orna, seriously. And in my creative coaching business, that's what I drive home to. You need to have an email list, because here's the reality. If something happens to Facebook, if you get locked out of your account, anything, you don't own Facebook, but you own those emails that you are collecting, and you can promote directly to those people. And it matters. Please have that. I have a pop-up that comes up on my website, and it's a free ebook. It's 6 steps to get over creative block. And it works. People put their email in, they download it, and that's how they sign up on my newsletter. So don't be afraid to put together something that is a freebie, but don't half-ass it either, y'all. Because at first I was like, well, I don't want to put a lot of time into this because it's free and I'm just giving it away. And my sister, who is an incredible entrepreneur, was like, don't half-ass this, because this is your first impression that they're going to see of you. And if they don't get anything out of this book, they're not going to stay on your email list. So she's right. Don't half-ass it. Just do something that has great content that people are going to get from it. And it doesn't have to be a how-to. It could be your poetry, just something sweet, simple, but as long as it's put together well, and offer that in exchange for emails. And it works. It really does. And you'll always have access to your people at that point. And you're right, building a community and building a fan base, building support. That's all about resources. There might be someone in your network that does a podcast that you didn't know. And when you get ready to release your next book, they might email you and say, hey, I would love to interview you, for your book. So definitely those emails are so important. Thank you, Orna. Marquis.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, great points. What I've learned, I guess, over time is that all reviews matter. Like, I mean, especially if you're planning on reaching out to somebody, with a bigger name, or even a bigger blog or online publication, like online mag or anything like that. They won't really give you the time of day most of the times if, like, they go on your social media or your platforms and they see that you're not engaging your fan base, or that you don't have one, period. So you can have amazing work, but if you're not engaging the people, you know what I mean, those reviews count first. The ones that are actually, logging onto your page or accessing your work or reading your book or listening to your music, those reviews matter, because if they've already created a buzz for you, what's to stop? I don't know, somebody like Creative Loafing, which probably doesn't exist anymore, but what's to stop these, local publications or online publications or anybody from getting in touch with you, wanting to review your book or do an interview for you, that will further progress the, popularity of your project. So I just say make it accessible and continue to engage the people that are already, reading your book, because they're going to pass the word on, like, yo, you need to really check out this book. This is a great project, and so on and so forth. And that's going to get you into the places that you want to get to.
Marquis, thank you so much for mentioning that, because I didn't even think about that. But yeah, I guess because I have high engagement, I I don't naturally, like, I don't intentionally think of that. But yeah, if you don't have that on your page, if your people are not commenting, getting excited about it, if you ask for someone, because I don't know the process. If I emailed that poet laureate, I don't know that she went on my page and was like, well, let me check her out, because I kind of vaguely remember her from an event, but not really. And if she landed on my page and saw that I was just messing around on my Facebook, not really talking about the craft, I didn't really have people engaging with me, she very well could have said no. So that's great. Great. Put your people first. I love that. I love that. Thank you, Marquis. Jay?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. If you're rewatching this, make sure you take notes on everything that Shane and Orna said. The only other thing I'll say is if you are going to, you're laughing, I'm being serious. If you're going to writing retreats and you're coming into contact with facilitators, or in some way you're going to a reading and you're in some way engaging with people who might be on your wish list to write a review or a blurb for you. I have in the past been too afraid to aim high, but if you establish this connection with these facilitators, then email them. Yeah, aim high. You know, if you've had something with Erica Dawson, then have that conversation then and email back and aim high for what you want your blurb to review to be. However, other than that, take notes on Orna and Shane. I think that was great.
I love that you said that too about aim high, because Jay, you've had great success with getting in touch with people that you have been on retreats with and done things with. And I think that that's a great example of, like, you don't know what you don't know, and it don't hurt to ask, right? And at least you're getting in their forefront of their brain. Your name is now swirling around in their brain, you know. Build that relationship, build that connection. That's great advice, Jay. Thank you for that. And this leads perfectly into the next question of how to build your poetry brand. And I want Marquis to start off with this, because he has done so well with Be a Grave Robber. And I know it's not exactly like a poet like brand, but the brand that you have built, everything is so concise. Everything is so, you know, when you see that color or that font, that's that organization. You know what I mean? So I would love to hear from you about, like, how you created the look of it and all of that. So
well, Be a Grave Robber started from a sermon that I was listening to by Dr. Miles Monroe, and he pretty much spoke about how the cemetery is the wealthiest place on earth, because it's where we bury our where the most potential is buried, all the greatest ideas, the books we never wrote, the songs we never sang, the businesses we never created. And my whole idea was to create a community that allowed other artists to invest in other artists. Because I find that I'm surrounded by so many artists, and it's always somebody lacking something that somebody else has access to. But I think it's like they don't know. So I wanted to build a community that was, you know, artists helping artists. Like, let's help each other, you know, reach our full potential. But as far as the look goes, it's like when you think of grave robbers, the first thing that comes to your mind is a graveyard. So it's like I wanted to go with something really simple. So for my logo, it's just a tombstone with a crack in it and the grave robbers emblem. And with the font color, it's that same type of, like, that gravish tombstoney feel or whatever. And the purple, black, and white were things that I felt were easier on the eyes. You know, if I put a bunch of bright colors, you know, in your face, or just a bunch of bland grays and blacks, it's like it's nothing that really draws you to it. But if you see that purple and black, you know what it is. So that's pretty much how I came up with that. As far as branding though, like anything that I post or anything that I put on the page or anything that I promote on my Instagram or anybody else's Instagram is always going to be community oriented. So if it's anything having to do with grave robbers, it immediately draws you in, especially if you're familiar with the name, you're familiar with what we do, then you know that it's going to be something for you. So it's, you know, the color just happened to be something that worked out for me.
I love that. And the color is very striking because it's powerful. They're power colors. And and the brand itself is talking about, reaching your full potential before you die. That's power. That's passion, and you have those powerful passion colors. And I think it works so well. And I love the idea of, and you're so true, when you're doing a brand, this goes for your Facebook page too, y'all. Every single thing you post, there has to be a point, and it has to tie into something. So normally when people are posting on social media, it's to build trust with their potential audience. It's to market something, to sell something, or it's to lead your client or your potential customer up to buy from you. Because let's be honest, some people are like, yes, here, take my money. But other people, you kind of have to hold their hand and walk them into this relationship with you before they'll buy, right? Because they don't really know. Maybe they've been burned before. I just had a client that I got who that happened to her, and she wanted to have a full-on conversation on the phone before she signed up for anything, even the free stuff. She was like, I need to talk to you first. And I was like, we can do that. So I called her up on the phone and I talked to her, and now I have a loyal fan and I have a client. So sometimes, you have to hold their hand and lead them up to it. And I learned this in TEDx. As a finalist, I learned that if there is something big that you want to present to your audience, right, you have to drop little things in order for them to be able to receive it. So like if I'm getting ready to release a book, right, before I release the book or before I release the album or before I say, hey, book me, to come to your city and speak, I need to be posting little things that show I'm accredited, that show I know what I'm talking about, that show why it matters. So by the time I go to post the thing, people are ready to receive it. I've helped them open up to receive it, right? So, and that's a great example for conversations too. If you're in a situation to where someone isn't able to receive what you're saying, sometimes you have to pause and assess where they're at and meet them where they're at and then take them there, right? And we do that on stage all the time with spoken word poetry. If I come out on stage and I start off the poem with something just very visceral, like something really like trauma based, right? The whole audience might go, whoa, whoa. But if I, say, hey, we're going to go on this journey, through my language, and I kind of like take their hand and lead them through, by the time I drop the point of the poem that might be really heavy, now the audience can hold it. They can receive it because I've led them up to that point. So just something to keep in mind. When you're building a poetry brand, look at other poets who are doing it very well. Moody Black, I've been saying his name all over the place. Moody Black is one of the best marketers in poetry I have seen. He has got it down to a science. He has banners, he has his whole look, he has his logo. He's a great promoter, and he knows which platforms to promote on. And that's something to keep in mind too. The different social media platforms have different age ranges, and they have different, I would say, agendas. Okay. So Moody gets a lot of success from LinkedIn because a big part of his revenue is going into school systems and colleges to work with students, right? So he knows on LinkedIn, that's where all the principals are and the school teachers. So he promotes on there. On Facebook, he knows he has a big spoken word community. So he promotes booking for him to come out and perform on Facebook. So very two different platforms, very two different reasons for posting, right? So when you're building your brand, make sure you have a logo, make sure that you have some social proof, pictures of you performing. If you're just starting out, get your friend in the audience to record you with their cell phone. Just make sure that they ain't all the way in the back of the building, and make sure that they're not shaking the camera like this, invest in a small tripod and build it as you go. Make sure you got pictures of you on stage or at workshops, start building that social proof. And when it comes to like poetry brand, look at why you write. So what is the reason you're doing this? And that'll help you pick colors. That'll help you pick a logo. My brand is a lightning bolt with a light bulb, and it's because I have a really cool backstory to it. I got struck by lightning when I was 7. It like skunked down my back, and yeah, like I was okay. It didn't hit like on my head or that close, but it was right down my back, and it lifted me up in the air. And as 7, I'm not thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. I was thinking, whoa, this is awesome. So when I was thinking about my brand and thinking about, well, what do I want my customer or my audience, even for poetry, what do I want them to feel? For some reason, that memory came back, and I was like, that's how I want them to feel. I want them to feel like, oh, this is awesome. And so I used it in my brand. So things like that, who you are at your core, what your end result you want to be. If you're a social justice poet, what are some symbols that you can use for a logo? What are the colors that emotionally can express what you stand for? So think about that when it comes to branding. And we will go to Jay, and then we'll go to Orna.
Okay. So I think all those answers have been great, and maybe more so for performance poets, and maybe other poets don't have, logos and this, all that. But I think what you just said is really important, which is you have to know what your brand is. Like if you're going to build your brand, you have to know what that is. And I think maybe what I'll tag onto this is, regardless of who you are, whether you're a performance poet or a page poet or whatever, if you don't have a brand, you have a brand. Like if you go to Walmart and you can buy the name brand cereal, but you can also buy Great Value. It's still a brand. It's just generic. So if you don't actively have a brand, then that's your brand. So I think it's worth all of us to kind of look at, and to mirror what Orna said, like you should have a website. There's no reason you shouldn't have a website, and that all goes into your branding as well. So yeah, so give thought to what your brand is, and then give thought, as you said, to how to build that brand, because there's no such thing as not having a brand. You have one. If you don't have one, it's been assigned to you.
Yeah, everything that everybody has said is so fantastic, and I don't think that I have an awful lot to add. I mean, I love that you have a brand, whether you know you have or not, and I think that a lot of poets shy away from the very word and associate it with something that's, almost like a spin or trying to project an image, and I think for a poet, the brand is not that. And I always think of it as your promise to the reader, whatever that is, that whether you're a spoken word poet or on the page, what you've got essentially is two imaginations connecting for the length of time that the poem is being read or received. And it's the bridge. The brand helps. Again, it's a little bit like we were talking earlier about that defining poem at the beginning of a book that sets the stage for what you kind of are trying to communicate, and then the reader brings what they bring, but you're settling them in, you're preparing them, and the brand, your brand is your promise to them. Was it Maya Angelou who said, they will totally forget what you said, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And that's what you're trying to encapsulate in the brand. So you might not have a logo beyond your own face and the covers of your books, because I'm always thinking books, but there must be some sort of consistency. Your brand sails through your words, and you don't even realize that your word choice is defining you, probably. And I think it takes time for a poet to understand this and what their promise is, and feel free to take your time, but do engage with that question.
So good, y'all. I love, Jay, what you said about like the generic versus the name brand. I never thought of it that way. That was super cool. Thank you. And then Orna, what you said, your brand is your promise to them. That's a beautiful way to look at it, and a beautiful access point for people to be thinking about that. So thank you. That is wonderful. And this is going to lead us right into the next question, how to make a press kit. So for spoken word poets, a press kit is where, you know, electronic press kit is where they can land on your page and see your work, see who you are, read your bio, and then decide whether or not they want to book you. For a page poet, this could be your book release. This could be if you want to get booked for workshops or to come speak or do conferences, things like that. So there's benefits to you really, goes back to Orna saying you need a website. So your press kit is your website. And I'm going to let Jay do that, talk about that first. We'll go to Orna, and then we'll go to Marquis. Jay, you've got a wonderful website that you have. I've been impressed with it. So that's why I want to start with you.
Okay, well, thank you. I feel like I need to overhaul that whole thing, but I think one thing that is done well on there is that my website has a separate landing page for the press kit, so I can link people directly to the press kit. So when I send out an email, if I'm trying to book a show, when I send out the email, I can include in it the link to the press kit directly, or if someone solicits me, then I can just send them the press kit. It's also easy to find on the website. So if somebody's just looking on the website and wants to find out for themselves what I've accomplished, what I can offer, and samples of my work, it's all right there. So I think there are free websites that are like one-pagers, and you can certainly put it on there. But there's low-cost websites and or free websites that will give you up to 4 pages free, I think. If you just dedicate one of those pages to be in your press kit, and just copy that URL down, that can be your electronic press kit. Also, just make sure that the photos you use on that are high res, if possible at all. High res downloadable photos are the best option, because then when you send it, they can take those photos right from your press kit and not have to hound you for something that is higher res than was taken in your backyard or something.
Totally true. And I will say this, every single person who's going to book you is going to ask for a headshot. They're going to ask for your photo. They're going to ask for your bio, and they're going to ask to see samples of your work. You have to have those 3 things at least on your press kit, and definitely downloadable photos, because as someone who gets booked often as well, I got very sick and tired of having to attach the same photo and send all the same info. But if you have it on a website to where they can download the photo themselves, you train people how you want them to treat you. So, you know, put that is on them to download. So all you got to do is send the link and go on about your business. So definitely make sure that it's downloadable. And a lot of landing page sites or websites will give you the option of putting a button, and you could put download photos on that button and then attach the file there. And so it allows people to do it for you, so you don't have to keep doing it over and over and over again. It's just work smarter, not harder. And it's also easily accessible for the person reaching out to you. All right, let's go to Orna.
Yeah, so remember the brand. I think that's the main thing I'd like to add to what's already been said, because I think what's been said is very comprehensive. So don't let your brands kind of suddenly disappear. So sometimes when people are doing their press kit, they have in the rest of their website lovely kind of feel and a sense of what they are about as a poet, but then when they come to the press kit, it all gets very serious, and it's all about, you know, just what I've done and the facts, ma'am, and all that kind of stuff. So carry the brand across into your press kit, and you might want to give a variety of bios, a very short, just, you know, 1 sentence kind of thing, a paragraph, and then quite a long perhaps piece. They don't have to use it, but as background for stories. It helps. A lot of press people are very busy, and I'm thinking here now more about, again, publicizing books as opposed to getting a booking as a performer. A lot of people who are doing reviews and features in newspapers and magazines, blogs, and so on, they're busy and they need the information. So if you've got background, colorful stories and things that they can take in. So if you follow the rule that in works in the media itself, which is that you get the who, the what, the where, the why, all that stuff short and sharp up at the top. But as you go down through your media page, you can actually develop it quite a bit, and they may never read that part, but you can actually influence the feature that they write. And again, it's about setting the scene for your thinking ultimately of the reader who will read that piece and go on to read your work. And then just in terms of a link that might be useful, selfpublishingadvice.org is our outreach service to the indie writing community, where we've got our blog and our podcast and all the advice that we give about self-publishing. And we have an article on what to include in your media kit. So selfpublishingadvice.org/media kit, if that is useful. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you so much. And I put that selfpublishingadvice.org. I put that in the chat. Definitely check that out, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you, Shannon. Other thing that I did mean to say, I saw that you put a link to Wix in the chat. I'm a WordPress fanatic. I love WordPress. I think it's a great, so I'd like to just do a call out for WordPress websites, which are totally free. If you can buy a theme, but you don't have to, and you can get a really good SEO optimized website for your work through WordPress free of charge.
Definitely. A lot of people sing praises to WordPress, and the options for WordPress are limitless too. Like, you can turn a WordPress site into a course site where people can take a course that you invent, on there. There are so many things that you could do with WordPress. I personally have Squarespace. I pay for my Squarespace account, and that's because I know that I don't have the time to go through and do everything, and Squarespace's support team and their staff is incredible. So I have mine through Squarespace, but it's not free. So that's why I didn't put that in the chat. But I highly suggest WordPress as well. Yes, thank you. Marquis, thoughts on Press Kit?
Hey, can you hear me? Yeah, no, I pretty much agree with what everybody has said so far. I mean, a lot of great points. The headshots are definitely important, a captivating but straight to the point bio. Any accolades or press quotes or coverage should be included in a separate section of your bio. It's important to include samples of your work, but also any upcoming tour dates or any places they can see you perform if you are a stage poet or performer, whatever. But that's just the layout. The presentation of your EPK could be the fun part. If you are putting out a project, the whole theme of your EPK could kind of go along with the project that you're putting out. It could have that same interest. It doesn't have to be just a bunch of boring facts about the artist. Like, you can, add that theme to it as well. But great points for everybody.
Thank you for adding that too, Marquis, because that's important. If you've ever had an interview, if you've ever been on a podcast, put those links on there too, somewhere as well. Thank you for that. Getting into the nitty gritty of things now, our last two questions. Tips for writing about trauma. This is a big one. And I'm not surprised to see this question, especially right now in our current climate, because we're all kind of stuck at home with all the stuff we don't really want to face, right? I'm going to let Marquis kick this one off because he's huge in personal development, and we've had conversations about this as well before. So Marquis, I'm going to let you start this.
Okay. when it comes to anything dealing with trauma, like writing is just a part of it, but anything dealing with trauma that you are deciding that it's time to face that thing, you don't want to run away from it anymore, or, you know, you just feel like you're ready to start working on a healing process. Number one is to be gentle with yourself. Like, refuse to rush your process. Sometimes writing about the trauma hurts just as much as the trauma itself. So take your time, listen to yourself. Don't try to make what you're doing a poem. Don't focus so much on trying to create a piece of art, because what you're dealing with is pain right now. So it's just like we're just pounding the clay right now. We're not trying to make a beautiful vase out of it. We're just pounding the clay, and we can get to the vase part later, you know. But right now we're just getting it out, and basically just give yourself time. Don't rush into it. That would be my tips.
Thank you, Marquis. That's great. Definitely take your time. Go line for line if you have to. Jay, let's hit you, and then we'll hit Orna.
I guess so. I'm gonna reiterate something I heard from Vivi Francis, and Vivi talked about the work that we do as poets being dangerous sometimes. That it is not always a clean and neat, safe work. Sometimes we have to dig, and sometimes that process, you know, can take a little bit of effort and maybe, you know, reimagine some pain. And her advice was to never spend more than 15, 20 minutes in that space. If you are going into a dark cave, then give yourself a time limit of how long you stay there before leaving and then coming back. And she also said possibly having some kind of totem. So if there's something that you really like you know, there's a certain candy that you really like, or there's this ornament that you grew up with that you keep by your desk or your table, something that really connects you, that will bring you out of this place, that will be your totem and almost your reward. Like you're in this place. Once you're out of that place, then you take that favorite piece of candy, or you take that favorite toy that you had growing up as a child or whatever. You use that as a totem to help you get out of that place and separate. If we're talking about real trauma, if we're talking about just writing that is hard, then that's one thing. But if we're talking about something that is traumatic that you want to do, but it is trauma, then her advice was to give yourself some kind of totem to help bring you out, and to give yourself a time limit of how long you spend in that place.
That's great advice. That is great advice. Orna.
Yes, I love that. I love what I'm hearing. I think of it as finding the safe space from where you can take the risks, and it's a kind of a balancing act, and it depends as well on whether it's your first time to go there, and you know how you do that. And sometimes we have to revisit again and again and again in different ways before we actually, I think of it as a kind of a rinsing out that eventually happens by going there. So the only way beyond it is through it, but you can go in there in the wrong way, and actually, instead of processing, what you've done is aggravated and made things worse. So creating that safe space. I love this idea of the totem that Jay is talking about. The time limit is a really good idea, and that's something I've thought about quite so clearly. But I have 3 processes. I think every life has a trauma at its heart, in a way. And even though obviously there are degrees of trauma, something very small can actually be something very big also. And it's very, very personal and individual, and nobody can tell you what you should or shouldn't feel around this stuff. So I have 3 practices myself that I use consistently and that I have passed on to other people over the years, and one is for mind, one is for body, and one is for spirit, and that's kind of the way I think about it. So in reverse order, a meditation. I think meditation is intensely powerful, and you know, something that I think really we fell out of as something went wrong with the human brain, and the thinking mind kind of took over. And I think we flick in and out of it, of kind of presence all the time, but actively sitting and practicing presence once a day at least, I think is really helpful. Free writing is, I think of as writing fast, raw, exact and easy, just letting the words come with no view of putting them out there. Nobody else is to see this work. This is just, it's not even work, it's just mind practice, just what's there and seeing what's there and allowing it. And it's a really useful way to do that kind of rinsing process where you go again and again and you kind of get so bored with the trauma at the end of the day that it's just over. It's over. And then the other one is movement of the body, conscious movement. I was interested, you were talking about the somatic movement, movement that again is about your relationship with yourself, and it can take many different forms. But so they are 3 practices that I use all the time myself, and as I say, that I've passed on to others and that have helped me to process stuff. And I offer them as they might help you too.
I love that. That you also touched on all 3, the mind, body, and spirit, because healing, it takes all those 3 aspects, right? I'll also share my process. My viewpoint on writing trauma to me is different because I guess it saved me so much. So even though it hurt to write, I knew I was going to feel better afterwards. So I never see writing about trauma, I never see vocalizing trauma on stage as a bad thing or a painful thing or an attack or a danger to me, because I know I'm going to feel so free on the other side of it. So my viewpoint's a little different, but I do know for a lot of poets, it is very hard. So I will say this. There is a thing called poem as a house, and I've taught this before, and it's a way to write about trauma in a safe way. And it goes back to meditation as well. So you see the poem as a house, and the front door is the first line. And you only focus on the first line, and the first line is the atmosphere, the location, right? So if I'm talking about a traumatic point of my past, and I want to write about it, and I'm using this metaphor as the poem as a house, I would walk up to the front door and I would open the door, and that's the first line. So the first line would be the kitchen. I'm in the kitchen, right? So you only focus on that part. Because with memory, sometimes if we don't have control over the memory when we're writing about trauma, everything comes in at us at once, and that's why it feels so heavy, and it feels like, oh, it's so painful and we can't do this. But if we practice on just focusing on the location, so just you're in the kitchen, that's all that's happening right now. Make peace with that. Now move in, right? So what sounds do you hear? What smells do you hear? Start adding in the senses, right? So now you've opened the door, you've walked in, you're in the hallway. If a poem is a house, you've walked in, you're in the hallway. So now it's like, okay, I hear my mom yelling. My dad has left, I don't know where he is, right? So you take it moment by moment, and you use that as a metaphor, the poem as a house as a metaphor to write line by line, and you take your time. Just like Marquis was saying, you take your time. Just sit with one line and accept, yes, I was there. This is what I heard. Make peace with it, point by point by point. And you do that through meditation, and you do that by sitting with it. And then that way you are able to write about trauma in a very safe space. And the other thing that I will mention when it comes to writing about trauma, definitely the whole, like, take your end result out of it. Just write to get the words out. Just write to get the words out. And it's not a totem, but it is kind of going back to what Jay Ward said. Whenever I have to do something that I've set out for myself that I know is going to be difficult, there's a book I'm working on about the way I grew up. I took a writing retreat to focus on that, right? And Marquis did one similar to the one that I did. And one of the things that I made sure I did before I sat down at the desk to write where I was I took Post-it notes. And I troubleshooted, right? What are the emotional hurdles I'm going to come into when I write about this? So one of them was the stories that I was going to tell about my parents, I haven't told before because I didn't want people viewing my parents in that way. Right? So I had guilt, I had shame, I had fear based on that. So on one of the Post-it notes, I wrote, "You are forgiven, you have permission. They love you." And I put that in several different areas where I could see it. So every time I hit that fear would come up, or that feeling of guilt and shame would come up. I would look at the Post-it note and remember, it's okay. I have permission to write about this. This really happened. You know what I mean? So I have the permission to write about this. Doesn't mean that they don't love me just because I'm exposing what happened, right? So think about the things that you're going to run into, little messages that you need to remind yourself of before you start the writing process. It helped me so much, so much. I got way more work done during that writing retreat that way than if I hadn't have done that. And the last thing I'll say about writing about trauma is don't go back and reread it as soon as you write it. I learned that the hard way as well. When I was out there taking my own writing retreat, I would often go back and reread what I just wrote, and then I was flung right into the trauma. And then I had to stop, and I had to get up, and I had to go outside, and I had to take a moment and remind myself I'm here, I'm safe, right? If I hadn't have done that, I could have kept writing and let the whole story come out. So don't feel the pressure of going back and rewriting, because you don't want to cut off that flow and that connection. So don't be concerned with how it's coming out. Just get it out. And that's all I will say about that. Welcome, Julie. I see you down there.
Yeah, sorry, I was late. I was working.
That's totally okay. We are recording this, so we'll be able to share it as well. I know it's like middle of the day over here, so but thank you for joining us. All right, our last question: how to slow down and add more emotion when performing. Jay, I'll let you hit that. Marquis, and then I'll go, and then Orna will close with you.
Repeat the question. How to slow down?
Yeah, so how to slow down on stage when you're performing, and how to add more emotion into your work on stage.
Well, how to slow down? You have to understand what your triggers are for speeding up. It sounds like you understand you are speeding up and you need to slow down and can't do it. So understand what those triggers are. When I first started performing, my triggers for speeding up and the adrenaline overtaking me so that the poem was in control and I wasn't, was the opposite of most people. I think for most people, if people are just like not paying attention to them, if they're like talking and having side conversations, or if they just appear to be bored, then that just makes your heart race. You're watching this and you're just trying to get the poem over and get off the stage. For me, I found it was the opposite. I got more scared of success. If people were like really locked into me and like just really engaged, then in my head, I was like, oh my God, what's happening? I'm going to mess up. So for me, so this is an old football adage. You play how you practice. Like how you practice is how you will play. So first of all, you should definitely be practicing the performance. And what I do is I do one of two things. I will either turn the TV on to my favorite show, the one that I can't help but look at and be distracted by, and perform the poem once I know it, perform the poem with that distraction. The other thing I will do, which I do this more often, is I will envision every scenario while I'm practicing. I will envision an audience that is completely engaged and going nuts over everything I say. I will practice an audience that couldn't care less what I'm saying and is halfway booing me off the stage. And I will practice the front row. These people are having a whole side conversation that I can hear. I'm imagining all of this, and while I'm practicing the poem. And I think that helps because it gets your mind geared towards that kind of thing. Because sometimes, no matter how much you practice, if you practice in a vacuum, you will find that when you get on a stage, you're not in a vacuum anymore. The environment that you used to practice in doesn't exist in reality. And then you can get scared again and start speeding up. So my number one tip for slowing down is to practice slow and practice with some level of distraction, whatever's comfortable for you that you can actually practice in. Because I've trained myself to practice with a lot of distraction. But that'd be my thing for slowing down. And what was the second part of the question?
Second part was, how do you add more emotion into your performance?
Okay, so here's my belief system on performing a poem. I was given the advice about 3 years ago by Carlos Robeson to not predetermine as I'm writing it how this is going to sound and how it's going to be performed, because then you lock yourself in a box, and then that's how you're gonna perform it. And what you really should do is let the words dictate the performance. The words are telling you, like, once the words are there, you've done half the work. The words are going to tell you what kind of tone you should be having, what kind of inflection you should be having. If you're nervous, hence going too fast and know that you need to slow down, then when you get to these punches that need time to breathe, or like a rhetorical question, you're going to speed through it. You're going to ask a rhetorical question and not give the audience a chance to answer it in their mind, right? They need that time. You're going to hit something that's funny and keep going and not give the audience time to laugh. You're going to, this is if you're nervous, you're going to have these words that are really, really weighty and really emotional, but you're not allowing yourself to feel the emotion. So this goes back to practicing and not predetermining. Your words are going to tell you how this should go. And you have to slow down and listen to the words. And it might take you a few times to just practice it in several ways in the comfort of your own home by yourself. Practice it too fast, practice it too slow, practice it too angry, practice it too sad, and start to see where some of it makes sense to do it that way. I think what you find is, once you get out of your own way, your natural inclination is oftentimes right. But if you're too nervous or too scared or too focused on other things, you won't even listen to your own inclination. Like, most of the time, if you're just talking, your natural gestures just come out and they make a lot of sense. But if you get on a stage and you're scared, then all of a sudden you're going to be doing gestures that make no sense with what you're saying. You're just scared and want to do something with your hands, So it has a lot to do with just slowing down and listening to yourself and listening to the words and letting them dictate how this should sound and what this should look like.
Very good advice, Jay. Very good advice. Marquis.
Yeah, I actually agree with all of that. It was great advice. I guess that was my issue for the longest, was going really fast, because I just kind of wanted to get the poem done with. And on top of that, it was like most of my stuff rhymed. So it's like I'm already doing it as if it's on top of music anyway. So it was like going just as fast as the song would. But one thing that I had to learn how to do was slow down, because I realized, just like Jay was saying, that there will be something funny within a poem, or something, like a hard-hitting punch within a poem, and I would give the audience absolutely no time to react, because I'll be on to the next part of the poem. But as far as emotion, one of these things I actually learned from Shane. I realized, like, when I did the one-on-one thing that you and I did at Amelie's, but I realized that I was getting on stage and I was just performing these poems, but there was absolutely no feeling attached to them. Like, I'm just saying a bunch of words that I wrote down, but there was absolutely no connection to them while I was on stage. So after going through this particular exercise with her, I realized that I wasn't really I wasn't connected with what I was saying. So the next time I got on stage, I gave myself the opportunity to listen to myself while I was performing the piece, like actually allowing myself to go where I was without getting sucked in too much, but just allowing myself to go to that place, to go to that feeling, to go to that experience. And it added a whole different vibe, added a whole different feel to the room, whole different vibe to the poem. Just, I was able to express myself in ways that I hadn't been able to before, and simply by paying attention to myself.
Thank you, Marquis. Yeah, I do remember that session too. It was very powerful. I'm so glad that someone asked those two questions, because this is what I do with my poetry mentoring. I do vessel work and I teach transcendence. So the reason what makes spoken word so powerful is that you're seeing someone relive a moment in time that was a huge hurdle for them to jump, and you see them jump it in 3 minutes and come out on the other side clean. And it's inspiring and it's powerful, and that's the reason why the spoken word makes you feel that way. But I will say this, you don't want to fake the emotion, because as a poet, I've seen that happen, and it's to me, it's disgusting. I will go as far as to say that. I would much rather someone get up there and read their poem bland than put on a persona to me that is about something that personal. I don't know if the audience truly knows, but me as a fellow poet, I see it as a huge insult to spoken word craft. I will say that, because we aren't up there doing acrobatic things. So the term performer, I think people, performance, people often attribute to acting, but we are not acting. We are reliving a moment, and that is the power of it, right? So there's an edge where you're teetering on that edge. Your goal is to not go over, because if you go over the edge and you fall apart on stage, now you're crying and you can't get through the poem, which can be beautiful and holy in its own right. But if you're being paid for a feature and they're paying you $200 to come do this poem, your ass better not collapse on stage. You better do what you came to do, right? So there's that. The thing that I will say about slowing down is take a tip from page poets. Use line breaks when you're memorizing your poem. If you know you need to slow down, then break the lines up into breaths. So that way, when you're memorizing the piece, that you're memorizing it in small chunks, and it'll change your cadence. It'll change the way you say it on stage. So that's a tip. And I love what Jay said about like putting on a distraction. I do that as well. Because when you get out there, if you want to start sharing your work, there are a lot of different environments, whether you're a spoken word poet or a page poet. If you have a book coming out and you have a book signing and you have to come read a few poems out of the book, you don't know what you're walking into. You might go to a coffee house and the cappuccino maker is making so much noise while you're in the middle of your poem. You know what I mean? Like, there's going to be a lot of different elements that can happen to you. So making sure you're mentally prepared is great. So thank you, Jay, for that. Emotion-wise, again, I do this activity with my students. Go through your poem and circle where the emotional words are, and list out the different emotions in the poem. Like, literally write it on the page, because you'll find that even a poem that is grief-based has other emotional elements in it. Because the last thing you want to do, especially as a performance poet, is get up there and your whole poem be like this. There are waves that you want to ride. So you can't start out high. If you start out real booming and powerful, then you got nowhere to go but down, right? So there's wavelengths that you can ride to be enjoyable for your audience and also drive the point of the poem home. And a great way to do that is to go through your poem and be like, okay, well, when I say this right here, that's definitely an anger thing. When I say this here, that's definitely a feeling of loss, sadness. Here's a little hope, so I know that I can smile at this line, right? Give them a little relief. So really, like, going through and rereading the poem and figuring out what are all the emotions that this poem is embodying, and then that can be your playground. And when it comes to physical presence on stage to capture those emotions, let whatever happens when you're practicing at home, whatever comes out naturally, pay attention to those. It's self-awareness of your body. So I have a poem where one of the lines is, I have a soul full of words and a pen like a bat. And I always swing my arm when I say bat. And that came naturally. I just happened to notice when I was memorizing the poem that I did that. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Let me put that in there. You know, I'll keep that. So pay attention to your body, how it's reacting. And that's another way that you can find emotion and when you need to slow down. Sometimes you're not going fast the whole poem. Sometimes you're speeding over a line because it hurts to say it. So pay attention where you're speeding up and ask yourself, why? Why am I rushing through that line? Do I not want to feel this? Maybe I need to make peace with this before I go on stage and say it. I think a lot of poets do that when they want to get their work out there and they want to be heard and they want to be seen, but they don't want to do the healing part of it, right? It goes back to that whole poets and self-care are in two separate rooms, you know? So yes, great advice, y'all. Does anybody have anything else that they want to say to that?
I don't have a lot to add. I come from not from stage performance, but for audiobooks. And so a huge amount of everything that you have said is completely applicable here. And when you have published your book in text, then the next stage very often is to put together an audiobook, and it's a completely different art form. And, you know, everything that has been said in terms of getting up onto the stage, except for the stage presence bit, you don't have to worry about that. But taking the poem out of the book that it was published in, putting it in a separate space, marking the emotions. And I think of just three things to kind of sum up what you guys have all said so eloquently. One is variety. So a huge number of indie poets who are doing audiobooks, it is a monotone, so got to be variety. Second, the power of the pause, and to absolutely make sure you have pause. And you said something very early on in our chat today, Shane, about the pause in a surprising place, the power of that, I think. And to what Jay said about, you know, doing it angry, doing it, learn off your poetry if you're going to make an audiobook. Get used to the sound of the poem in your mouth. And one thing that I found very useful, because I was so rubbish at all of this, I was so bad, I did everything wrong, I wasn't as monotone, just wanted it over, I wanted it to be easy and not to do the work. And I had to remake, and I'm in the process of remaking audio. And one of the things that was really helpful to me is a silly tip. It's literally do it in silly voices, you know, funny voice, exaggerated. Something about that took something away from me and made it more doable. So that's all I have to add on that.
Orna, I love that. Thank you so much for adding the point about audiobooks too, because we're seeing a lot of people right now realize that they need to make their work more accessible. So it helps for because people who are blind love poetry too, you know, like making sure that we are accessible for all people. You know, we talk about equity. We talk about that's how we involve equity into our work. And that's so important that you said that. And I love that you were honest about how, like, your first attempt, you know, but I think that that's beautiful as well, because the important thing is that you do it, is that you get started and you learn as you go. I've said this, I don't know how many times last week, YouTube influencers, their first video isn't high quality. It is in a very dim lit room. You can barely hear them. And every so often, YouTube influencers who are very well known and very up there, they make full-time living off of YouTube. They will share their very first video that they ever posted to show you, like, it's not how you start, it's that you start, you know? So keep that in mind. But I love that, y'all. Thank you. Yes, definitely. Audiobooks are huge. Make sure that your work is being accessible on all platforms when it comes to that. And it can be applied for page poets tremendously. I would love to see the gap between spoken word and page, because I don't know if it's the same in London, but here, Orna, it's very much, I guess you could say, segregated between the different types of poetry. and it's almost like one feels like they're more acclaimed than the other, right? And I think that both forms, both styles have a lot to learn from each other. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to wrap it up. Y'all have been tremendously amazing, and I'm so thankful and grateful to be here today with y'all. Thank you so much for being a part of this summit. We are in that last home stretch of April, y'all, and I love you. I'm so proud of you for being here and working on your craft and sharing. Does any of the people who are listening in have anything you want to say? You can like raise your hand if you have a question for the panel before we jump off here. All right. I hope that y'all have a wonderful day. If you do have any questions, please message us, email us. We're on Facebook as well. Enjoy your day. I hope that this was helpful. I know I learn something every time we have the panel. So I'm excited. And if you're interested in those electronic press kits and those websites and landing pages, I don't know if you're interested in MailChimp, but next week, I'm not sure what day yet, but I will be doing a free workshop on how to set up a landing page, how to start an email list, and do automated emails. So if you're interested in that, message me and I will get you on the list. It's free. So I love y'all. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to unmute everybody and let's all just cheer because I just want to do it.
My voice.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is great. I enjoyed it.